All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland, and I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. We are here to talk about droid rights in Star Wars. And to do that with me is our friends who I've known and cons, and everyone is very passionate about Star Wars. First up is Angela Story, Stephen Tullifield, and Gabby Snyder. And we're going to have a rip-roaring good time talking about droid rights. But first, I want to acknowledge the passing of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Every lawyer who's been admitted since the 1990s has read opinions about her in law school. She turned into a cultural phenomenon and made a huge impact on the practice of law. And while we mourn her, do not lose hope and think of what she overcame in her practice with, battling for gender equality and her time on the court. So for those who feel sad about the current state of politics, remember what she went through and to carry the torch forward. So with that, let's talk about on the basis of droid. Why are droids made to suffer? And we're going to take a look at some of our favorite droids and ask the hard-hitting questions. Are they alive? And what rights do they have regardless of their definition of being alive or not? So we'll start with a little fun. Angie, who was your favorite droid?
Oh, R2-D2, without a doubt. To be able to show personality with just sound was amazing. I mean, you clearly knew he had personality. He's definitely my favorite.
Solid choice.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go with C-3PO. I'm a big K2SO fan, but I think I just really identify with C-3PO because he's so fussy and such a worrywart, and I feel that to my bones. He's always scared and trying to convince people to not run directly towards the danger, and that is me 100%.
Fair. He could be the test for the reasonably prudent person.
Yeah,
so there's
exactly.
Gabby, your favorite droid?
I think I agree with C-3PO as well. I think it's just fascinating that a droid is capable of having an anxiety disorder.
Totally.
But I do also, I would say, have a soft spot for Chopper from Rebels. I love his grumpiness and how, like R2-D2, he expresses a lot of personality with no words, and it's a very, very different personality.
So great.
Mine traditionally was R2-D2, but after IG-11 and The Mandalorian, that might change. And it was so brief, but man, that was incredible. So
what a redemption arc, right?
Yeah, there's
right.
Truly.
When you talk, on whether or not somebody is alive or not, and this is one of the droids that says, "I'm not alive." Yet before he does his moment of sacrifice, he looks down at the child and actually runs his fingertip over the child's ear very affectionately, like any parent or nanny would a child that they care for. And he's just like, I don't agree with his own analysis that he's not alive. That's a very compassionate human thing to do. So yeah, part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is Star Wars has positive representation of droids. And there are many pop culture stories where droids or robots are the bad guys. They rise up and they kill the humans. And in Star Wars, we have droids who clearly are the hero and are a good reflection of humanity. So I want to get into this and talk about what is the basics of being a person under the law. And Gabby, as the law student who's probably been reading these cases more recently than many of us, what's your initial take on that?
Oh, right. Well, I can't promise too much. I haven't taken anything like a human rights course. But my initial surface reaction is I can't really think of a way to legally make a droid a person, because they're not alive. It's so much of the expansion of sort of who counted as people across history was all still, within the human species. There's plenty of precedent for, starting from with the limited category of white men being like a full person under the law and expanding, gender, race, etc. But I think to count droids as a person, you would have to look more to precedent about animals, potential animal rights. Actually, one case that does come to mind is the one about the whales. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. I think it's
there was one of the few 13
the cetacean community versus, I can't remember who, but somebody was suing someone basically on behalf of all the world's whales, dolphins, porpoises, etc. for now I can't remember what it was, but it was some kind of animal cruelty thing relating to sonar, maybe. And the Ninth Circuit was not going to accept the whales as people.
Yeah, well, that was for the
Navy. A little like a chimp have copyright law or copyright.
That one dealt with testing their sonar system that could kill whales, and people rightfully were concerned with the Navy killing whales because that doesn't play well. But Stephen, do you have a counter to that when we think of personhood and perhaps even taking it to citizenship?
Right. I mean, it's interesting that when we talk about people in the law, and by the way, this whole conversation has so many ethical and moral dilemmas to it. It's such a fraught conversation about how we define humanity and what it means to be a human being. It's so you have entire courses, philosophy courses about what that means. I think to circumscribe it a little bit, when we're talking about legal personality, we're talking about the ability of the law, or the ability of a person to interact with society in a way that the law would acknowledge. So we're talking about the ability to contract, to convey property, to vote, or to have a voice in the political process. And while natural persons that we think of as being kind of human beings certainly have all those rights, also corporations are considered to be people for many of those purposes. Corporations under Citizens United have the right to contribute to political candidates. They can contract, they can convey property. So it's interesting that there's sort of both animate and inanimate things that can be legal people. But yeah, I don't know where droids would fit on that continuum. It's really strange.
Angela, do you have some thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're looking at it in the Star Wars universe, droids are clearly property in that universe. Mm-hmm. They're bought, they're sold, they're treated as property. They're not even really treated so much as pets, but property, which is very different from, say, the Star Trek universe, in which non-living beings have been determined to be sentient and have certain rights. But in the Star Wars universe, that is not something that's ever really been given to any of the droids. And then the other question comes up, in terms of animal rights, we limit which animals have rights. I can't kick and beat my dog, but I can snap a rat's head with a trap. and that's not considered animal cruelty. I can catch a fish, which ultimately is probably painful to the fish, but something that we're allowed to do. So even within our own laws, we differentiate between certain animals and which ones have rights of not being abused and which ones don't. And I think the droids are very similar. We have droids in Star Wars that show empathy, show emotion, and then others that don't. And how do you then differentiate between those types of droids?
I think it's one way to look at this is saying mammal, and there are mammals that are humans and mammals that are orangutans and mammals that are whales, and that those are giant lines of distinction that we can agree that they're alive, but there's a different level of sentience and free will that could be exercised. I want to read from a case from 1971 that dealt with the definition of a robot. And in that, the court stated a robot is not an animate object. It is not a living thing. It is not endowed with life. A robot is a mechanical device or apparatus, a mere augmentation that operates through scientific or mathematical media. And there are lots of definitions with AI and artificial intelligence. But on whether or not it's a life in person, I'll go there and highlight the dark case from the United States Supreme Court, and that's Dred Scott, which is a 200-page abomination, and with which the Chief Justice of the United States, Roger Taney, stated Africans were never intended to be U.S. citizens and never could be U.S. citizens, and went out of his way to turn the United States into a slaveholding country overall, where people from Africa would have no rights. Those kinds of lines, when drawn, cause civil wars, and people tend to forget the impact that Dred Scott had in our American Civil War. But I want to highlight that to show there's been a history of injustices, that were legally sanctioned, whether or not it was only white men owning property who could vote, and then Andrew Jackson just expanding the franchise to white men and using that as a mechanism to justify holding others in servitude. So when it comes to droids, I think that line, if they're like a droid like R2 or K2 or C3PO, they show a lot of the qualities on what we would consider life, which I think raises the interesting question of what is a test for life, be it a living organism or a species. And would any one of you like to take the first swing at that?
Absolutely not. that is a hard question.
Yeah. I mean, that's a question for philosophers, but I mean, self-awareness is clearly top of the list for life. Are you self-aware? Are you aware of your, do you know that you are alive? Is kind of the top one. And one of the questions I have for you, Josh, is, I mean, are you saying that droids as a whole are a species, or are R2s their own species? Is each type of droid its own species? I think that probably makes a difference as well.
I think.
Yeah, I'd say back to your original question, self-awareness is required.
I would frame it in terms of artificial intelligence, and whether that artificial intelligence has the self-awareness and free will and hopes, dreams, all the things that we consider alive. And by doing that, you could at least frame it into the different types of droids, whether it's a R2 unit or a BB unit or a probe droid, because there could be different levels of intelligence that those droids have. And the more human-like, with free will, fear, because let's think of Return of the Jedi, when we're in Jabba's palace, and we have the torture scene of a droid, where a droid's flipped over, it's a power droid, and his little feet are branded. and he's screaming no. And the other droids are
No.
made to watch.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
That's messed up.
So traumatizing.
Yeah, but Artu's clearly freaked out by it and shaking because he's watching a droid get tortured in front of him. And whether you think that's like a pet, like a dog getting tortured or a local kitten, there's a reaction of like, you sick monster, I will end you. I'm like, that's
not to mention
reaction.
Whoever designed this droid and decided to give it pain receptors.
Right.
Like they could have made the droid incapable of feeling pain because, they're. I'm just surprised that like whoever built it, designed it, decided that was actually useful in some way.
Let's make them neurotic.
Yeah. And can I pause just to note the layers of like psychology here that I had the action figure of the torture droid. Like what? Like they first of all they made one and then my parents gave it to me. Like what?
Very
and it was kind of a cool droid actually, the way his legs were. He had like these kind of like cool like hip articulations. He was a really cool design, but that is messed up.
Wow.
Right?
The fact that they even thought about making
anyway, Star Wars has many layers in my consciousness and psychology. It goes very deep.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
I think actually in what we were just talking about, there potentially we could, I think, divide it into two questions of who is alive and then within who's alive, who is sentient. Because there's, there's like the biologist's list of criteria for life, but there are definitely like biologically many things that are alive but don't necessarily have self-awareness per se. And the droids clearly have, some of them clearly have what seems to be sentience. And that might be a separate question from whether they're alive versus, so comparing like R2-D2 to a mouse droid, which is, so tiny and so simple, it doesn't seem to do much other than scurry around, maybe carry messages. Honestly, I'm not even sure exactly what their purpose is. And they're effect, I guess they're the robot version of a mouse, but a mouse is clearly not a person. So are all droids potentially people, or are only certain droids potentially people?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I wonder if there's, it seems like the way that L3's sort of her evolution seemed to imply that droids can transcend those levels autonomously almost, because she sort of start out as an astromech and then she just started to compile different things to her, both her physical form and to her consciousness, that kind of elevated her to the what we see in Solo. It's so interesting that that they have, first of all, those impulses, and that they can actually follow through on them and aspire to be something better or more conscious, more human.
Well, and that she felt one of her goals was freedom. I mean, so she understood that she was being kept as a slave, and that her goal was in fact freedom, which is unique for the droids in Star Wars.
Yeah, because a lot of them seem happy or content, at least, with the symbiotic relationship with humans. And granted, you do get different levels of how people interact with droids. So you get all the Skywalkers are good with droids. They're wonderful, thoughtful, and care about the droids. Because if R2 was your wingman, I'm pretty sure you would be super supportive of him. Cassian Andor in K2, positive relationship. Lando in L3, perhaps unhealthy, but definitely
very close.
very
close.
Yeah, and in ways we don't want to think about. To Han Solo being constantly annoyed with C-3PO because he does interrupt at all the wrong times. So
Mhm.
he does have a tradition
It
there.
makes me think too of the Charles Soule Poe Dameron comic. There's that great sort of kind of running gag about how Jess Pava kept killing her astromechs, and they started to like protest and like wouldn't. They would try to avoid being her astromech on
Oh
her
my
ship. So just sort of as a counterpoint to all the people who get along great with droids, there are some people that droids actively avoid once they know that they are in danger. It's so interesting.
It was in Resistance. I don't remember the episode or the exact scene, but the droids were getting together to talk about. It was almost like unionization. Like they were all like, no, this is not happening," type situation. Because again, they're like, "I'm tired of seeing this." Yeah, we kept getting blown up. Like this is not okay.
Right.
So
yeah.
I mean, but self-preservation is part of self-awareness. So which kind of goes towards their being sentient or a person necessarily under the law.
Yes. Now there's one way to think about this. Actually addresses some recent law review articles that talk about whether or not AI can form contracts, because there's stock software that can analyze market trends and then buy and sell. So it's the algorithm making the purchases. And that raises weird questions of like, can AI actually form a contract and do that? And so there's interesting analysis there on that question. But let's get to one of the first issues that we see in the original 1977 Star Wars, where the cantina scene with the bartender says, "We don't serve their kind here," which is right out of a 1950s horror movie, pre-civil rights movement. The fact that there are some people now who think that can still be okay is horrifying. But that raises the public accommodation laws, and let's get into that on the legality of telling classes that we don't serve you here, because that's real. And Angie, do you want to take the first swing at the public accommodation issues of refusing to serve droids?
Sure. So, I mean, the law requires that, or states that you can't discriminate against people based on certain characteristics or classes, things like sex, race, color, ancestry, national origin, medical condition, marital status, sexual orientation. That there are limited classes. You can discriminate in terms of, for restaurants, if you're not going to buy anything, I can kick you out of my restaurant. Perhaps it was they don't serve droids because droids don't consume drinks or food, which is therefore not profitable to the cantina. And they may have a 2-drink limit or minimum. So in terms of discrimination, there is some discrimination that's allowed. It's specifically spelled out what classes and areas you cannot discriminate against. And I don't think that droids actually fall into any of those listed classes.
Yeah, are they loitering is, the key issue. Right. Stephen, your thoughts on, is the issue we don't serve your kind because we don't stock what you need, whether it's an oil change or whatever recharging that a droid would need that they could be charging for?
I hadn't thought about it that way before, Angela. That's a really great point, is that the 14th Amendment is really about, race, and it's sort of the authority of our legislature to pass laws is grounded in that equal protection provision. In Section 5 of the 14th Amendment vests Congress with the authority to pass anti-discrimination statutes, and droids are not mentioned in the Constitution anywhere, I guess. So, but I mean, I guess if we're thinking of them as people, I guess you could make an argument that among sort of your status as a droid is one of those immutable characteristics, I guess, to borrow some language that one doesn't have any control over. That if you're discriminating against someone based on those characteristics, at least if they're a person, then that may have some connection to the 14th Amendment's anti-discrimination principles in the way that sort of gender does, even though that's not really in the 14th Amendment either. But of course, the Supreme Court has held that that's nevertheless part of that prohibition against the government treating people differently based on things that they don't have any control over.
So let's do the law school thing and add a hypothetical. So Gabby, let's just say that I go to a bar and I bring a dolphin with me, in a nice tank, and you know the bartender says we don't serve their kind here, and you know they don't have fish, you know, like they don't have dolphin food or drinks, you know. Are we similar to that, or is this in a different situation with the droids?
Well, you could try to tell them it's your service animal, your emotional support dolphin, and you don't go anywhere without it. That might qualify.
If he has a vest, yeah. So,
right.
But yeah, that's tricky because what protected class do dolphins fit into? They they're not species,
right? Yeah,
they're they don't have a national origin. They're born
but they
in the
can't
ocean.
help if they're dolphins.
That's true. They cannot help being a dolphin, so it is an inherent characteristic. It's certainly like there's definitely a clear logical parallel there between like you're just born this way. You were born a dolphin.
Yeah, if the dolphin saved me, I owe him a life debt. We hang out now. This is the way life is. Like the dolphin goes where I go, and
he's your co-pilot.
Yeah, it's just the fact that they don't serve fish, for Squeaky the dolphin, like that's a problem. So, yes.
But I mean, one very different thing in the cantina is it's not humans, it's a number of different species, and clearly health and safety codes aren't really a concern in the cantina, whereas, if you were to try and take a dolphin or peacock into a restaurant, health and safety codes would probably trump anything. But at the cantina, they were perfectly happy with no clothes and fur and guns and less than clean conditions.
It's a hive of scum and villainy and salmonella, like all sorts of like horrible food practices.
Wash your hands. Yeah, that's so much there. So let's talk about analysis of individual droids, and to kick that off, I want to invoke a quote from Quill from Chapter 7 of The Mandalorian: The Reckoning. Droids are not good or bad. They are neutral reflections of those who imprint them. And which is, again, the wonders of The Mandalorian and philosophy there. But let's go through this list of droids and give our analysis of what kind of class we think they are. So we'll start small. A mouse droid.
Did anyone else read the Certain Point of View story about the feature of the mouse droid? It was one of my favorites in that book. Because it was told entirely from the perspective of the droid on the Death Star. So it was kind of like running in between the little, like the scenes and stuff.
So cool.
It was really good. And
it
takes a little bit of getting used to because it's told in kind of code. Like you're reading the robot as the droid as it's processing the things it's observing. It's really interesting. And so people are speaking to the mouse droid. There's one stormtrooper for whom the mouse droid is kind of his confidant, because he's kind of sending messages to different people. So I don't know that I would think of the mouse droid as being more along the lines of a kind of trusted pet or a companion, as opposed to being sort of a person. Although the droid did have reactions to things that were happening, but ultimately it sort of seemed to have limited agency and limited sort of sentience.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd put it more along the lines of my smartphone. It has, or the device that I can't name because she'll start talking.
She who must not be named.
She who must not be named. Who can communicate, can respond, appears to be irritated when I say not nice things to her, but is clearly not a person and not alive.
So, BB-8, that adorable little ball of fun.
Him.
I know that was the point of making a cute, adorable droid.
So he's such a round boy. I love him. Or it, I guess. BB. I guess in the films they do refer to him as him. I guess, do they, or does he have pronouns?
Yeah, they do. They do have, droids do have pronouns, and because there are female ones and there are male ones.
It was ambiguous which BB-8 was, though, for a long time. But I guess they did start using male pronouns. I don't know. Yeah.
I think that's right.
Him, I think.
And in Resistance, Kaz eventually gets a female ball droid.
Is it CB-8? Is that
no, it was like CB. Was it CB9 or something?
If only.
CB. I'm blanking. All the letters and numbers. Yes. So thoughts on BB and Gabby?
So many letters.
Your thoughts?
There's something about BB-8 feels more pet-like to me, but I think it's about how the combination of his cuteness and roundness and some of the way that the human and other characters treat him, he feels a lot like a dog. But he is capable of much more human-like communication, including the ambiguous, was it a thumbs up or was it a middle finger bit? That seems like a very human thing to do. And it's just, that seems like free will to me. Like, was he really programmed to do that, or did he learn it and do it on his own?
Did he learn it from Poe? Because that's the sort of thing I would see him learning from Poe.
Yeah. And also at the beginning of The Last Jedi, when he's kind of frantically trying to repair the X-Wing from the inside as like the panel is sparking. That seems like something that could be automated, that sort of repair function. But at the end of that little sequence, when he just kind of like curses in droid and like slams his head into the side of into the panel, that seemed like a very kind of like emotional kind of frustration response that seemed to be a little more than just kind of an automated repair sequence that make him seem more human or more sentient than just a programmable response.
Yeah. Angie, your thoughts?
I see him more like a dog, with the ability to show emotion, but not quite at that level of sentience, or being alive. He's cute, but so's my dog.
There's also the Rise of Skywalker moment where Poe is reunited with BB-8, and he basically rubs his belly. And it's like greeting a dog with how he interacts with them. Because I wouldn't do that to another person. I don't see that ever ending well.
No promises after pandemic is over. Because as soon as I see other human beings, I'm gonna. I might rub your belly. I just no promises.
kind of like a baby where, you know, you're blowing a raspberry on their tummy to make them laugh. But other than that,
Right.
no, probably keep your hands to
Post-pandemic,
yourself.
there's going to be lots of hugging. There's going to be lots of hugging of handshakes. So I missed you. Yeah. So, I skipped there a second. So, and I'm back. Okay. It's good. All right. K2SO.
He's. Oh, sorry. I think we lost you there for a second, Josh. Are you there? Yep.
Am I back? Okay.
Yeah.
How about K2SO?
I find his story. I mean, he's a great character. I love him so much, and Alec Tudyk's performance is so amazing. It's so troubling, though, to me that that droids can be reprogrammed like that. It really speaks to this level of the lack of agency that droids have in the Star Wars culture, that they can just be changed so drastically that their personalities can be modified, presumably against their will. So I find that if I think about it too much, I find it very troubling that they're able to do that to droids. But again, if they're just property, it's not any different than reformatting your hard drive and installing a new version of an operating system. And so I guess if you don't think about it too much, I guess it's fine. But it is, K2SO seems to be almost like there could be a really dark, kind of tragic story in his backstory that that is probably better left untold. But
yeah, if we have to do a viability test before reformatting hard drives, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So that's. All right, from K2, does everyone have similar feelings on K2 with the amount of agency he has?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay. How about Q9? Oh, go on.
I mean, I was going to say, K2 seemed, he had interesting quirks, you know, sarcasm, disobeying some orders that he maybe necessarily didn't agree with. But the question is that because he was kind of self-aware, or was that more a glitch in his programming itself? Although the sarcasm, I would have to say, leans
certainly
more
sounds
towards
like it. And you know, as I'm thinking about it too, I'm wondering if like maybe at least in this case, his reprogramming was maybe more liberating than I'm initially giving it credit for. That maybe it allowed him to become more of what he actually was. That the sort of the metaphor of once he was kind of freed from the tyranny of the oppression of the Empire, that he was able to self-actualize in a way that he wasn't able to previously. So maybe putting a more positive spin on it might make me feel better about K2SO's story.
Yeah. The Empire's not known for freedom, so he wanted a blaster, you know, and eventually he got one. So there's that. Or the wonderful line of "I'll be there for you, Jin." Cassian said, "I had to." Like that seems like a lot of personality, but at the same time, he's following Cassian's orders. Here's one. He's a newer droid, and we saw him in Mandalorian of Q90, called Zero, and part of the prisoner episode. And to me, he had lots of agency and personality and seemed to be calling the shots and seemed to be more of a bounty hunter than just property. Gabby, do you have an opinion on where he would fall on the spectrum?
I'm not sure about that one.
He was that the one that was sort of like kind of trying to solve the mystery in the cockpit during the heist, or when they were trying to free the other character from the rebel cruiser, and he came across. Did he come across the files of the child? I can't remember, but he certainly
message from. I thought it was a message
right.
From Greece.
Yes. Yeah. So there's sort of been there was definitely sort of that like inquisitiveness, or he was able to detect a gap in the story in a way that sort of made it seem more more human, or he kind of initiated his own investigation in a way that seemed more than just kind of computational or pre-programmed.
Angie, your thoughts?
Is he the one that said he was? Yeah, is he the one that said he was smarter than?
Yeah, he was. He had
organic life forms. Yeah. I mean, that to me puts him kind of on a more of a sentient, alive person level, in that he can articulate and have pride, arrogance, or it could just be deductive logic reasoning as part of his programming. But I remember that one. I thought that was kind of interesting. I'm like, oh, he's evolving.
I think it's probably the most complicated to answer, and that's IG-11, because he gets lobotomized, he gets reprogrammed, but he still has that baseline programming of the manufacturer warranty of not being captured. And that's always there, and he's got the thermal detonator in his chest, so he's ready to blow up.
What a great bit that was. That was so brilliant. Like that writing.
From the first episode to the last. Stephen, your thoughts on where does IG-11 fall on this spectrum?
It's so interesting. Like when you said that quote by Keel, they're only neutral. In other words, that they reflect what their programmers, the biases their programmers put into them, and that sort of it rings true to me. I mean, it's very literal when you're talking about droids, but also to people. Like, we are what our parents, we have the values that our parents taught us. We become sort of in many ways, the destinies that, have been given to us, that we've inherited from culture and from, from our upbringings. And so it gets into really interesting nature versus nurture questions about our droids, just really refined examples of what we are as human beings if we are only our nurturing, if we're just what people imprint upon us. I think it's fascinating, and IG-11 is such a great example of, like, if you're in a caring environment where someone cares for you and nurtures you, you can in turn become a nurturing person. But if all you know is what you've been told by a faceless corporation or manufacturer, and then you don't have any sort of values and you don't have any morality, I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. So the biker scout scene where he brutally murders the biker scouts, and the first thing he says to the child is, "That was unpleasant. I'm sorry you had to see that." Again, if I had a lighter, it'd be in the air. Just so brilliant, pure Star Wars. But, like, what's your reaction to that? And Gabby, like, your thoughts on, is he alive? What's the deal?
I mean, I have to wonder with I mean, this is really for all the droids, but how much of what we see as emotion is us projecting onto them, and the droids having been programmed to behave in ways that seem emotional to people. Like, do we have any way of knowing if they're actually feeling that in the same way that we do?
Great observation. I didn't think about it that way.
I think IG-11 and Nurse and Protect,
he was programmed to
the stroking the ear. I mean, that was again like a baby in the cradle type of thing. Yeah. Like you rub the child.
But was that because that was beneficial for the child, or was that because IG-11 was doing it for some emotional reason of himself? It could just as easily have been his.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think of
this is something that's beneficial for the child.
It's our anthropomorphization of inanimate objects, or, like, Andrew, like you said, your pet. Like, you attribute all these sort of feelings and responses and thoughts to animals, and who knows if they actually feel those things or think those things, but we as human beings are so ready or so willing to attribute those sort of human things to things that may or may not be actually alive. It's so interesting.
Yeah, people are very good at anthropomorphizing, at seeing faces, in inanimate objects.
Yeah.
It's like that's a really easy thing for our brain to do. So
great point.
Exactly. So a lot there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Angela, thoughts on IG-11? Would you want him babysitting your kids?
Oh yeah. You can gun people down and then be nurturing and protective. Absolutely. If
IG-11 might really have some advantages of being able to plug right into your home, like Wi-Fi,
totally
really
board.
monitor connections and website browsing. That might be really handy.
Mm-hmm.
Keep the Roblox off the screen during school time. That would be great.
End with the original R2D2 and C3PO, and we can take them together since they're normally a pair, with a couple exceptions. But there, and again, C3PO at the end of Revenge of the Sith, we hear have the protocol droid's mind wiped, and that was he was not a happy camper to hear that, because he was getting used to flying. That's all gone. But let's talk about them together. And Angie, why don't you kick us off on, are they alive? And we'll go from there.
Emotionally, I want to say yes. They are the original. They are the ones that as a child I've wanted. They've been around for us the longest. Emotionally, I absolutely want to say, yes, they are alive. They've got rights. Don't be mean to them. But at the same time, I think within that universe, they are property. They are not sentient to the standard that's necessary to be alive and to have rights. And I think there was one episode where the galactic, all sentient beings are equal. Mm-hmm. They aren't sentient. They are programmed to act sentient, but they are not in fact sentient, which breaks my heart to say.
Gabby, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as sad as it is, I think I probably do agree with that. I definitely want to feel like they're, but it's hard to be sure. And C3PO in particular is the most human. His whole purpose is to facilitate communication. He speaks all these languages. He does the most human things, and they clearly express emotions. But yeah, they're obviously property. I mean, but then we'd see some droids who are not property, right? The IG droids, do they have an owner? It seems like they act autonomously, even though they behave according to programming. So even though this is in general, droids in Star Wars are property, there do seem to be some that are not specifically owned by anyone. So that to me seems like a hint of possibility that they could be more than that.
And that picks up on, I can't remember who did the blog post. Was that you, Josh, that wrote the one about the ability of IG-88 to contract? Because it seems like if they perhaps the droids are working as sort of that stock trading software you were talking about that are kind of working, automating as kind of agents of some other kind of sentient being, and are sort of making contracts on behalf of that agent. But maybe they're making contracts on their own for some sort of valuable consideration that they're receiving. I don't know, credits maybe. I don't know. Do droids spend money? Like, what do they need? But it's a little unclear. But that, I mean, that raises sort of the interesting question of whether they have the kind of personal agency that we would attribute to like a legal person that can make contracts and can appreciate risk and make decisions based on fully informed consent, that we sort of expect adult people to be able to do. It's a really interesting question.
I think they would fall into a different category, and a category that we don't have.
Yeah,
because we would, because we have laws prohibiting cruelty to animals. So if a droid was getting tortured, and you could put the droid on the stand, who could then talk about, and then they hung me upside down, and they, the jurors are going to be sobbing hysterically while the droid's recounting how he was branded. Yeah, people are going to get very upset, and the law will go like, well, you can't torture a droid, so it's okay. Like, that would not be an acceptable answer for a civilized society. So whether it's a mix of destruction of property or cruelty to animals, or it's just like, we have laws that prohibit elder abuse. It's something would form to prohibit that type of cruelty from happening. Now, whether or not you get liberated droids who are completely self-aware and living their best life, well, that's just weird, but I'm like, it could happen. I mean, it just, in the Star Wars world. So it would need a different category in order for it to work. But for bars, I do like the idea of, we don't serve dolphins here. Like, that doesn't mean that they don't just, we're not, we don't. Like, it's not, we're not set up for that. So like, droids at a bar, we'd have to put in charging stations, oil and food to fix. Like, there's all kinds of situations where that would just not be good for a droid spa.
But counterpoint, if they're a person, and they need sort of modifications to the environment and able to participate equally and to access the facilities, sort of federal and state accessibility laws, which also stem from Congress's Section 5 of the 14th Amendment authority, anti-discrimination legislation authority. The cantina has all those steps. Like, how would even C-3PO get down all those steps, or R2-D2? Maybe there's an elevator somewhere that lets them access it, but just sort of another dimension to how we make accommodations in order to let all people participate in things. But in the Star Wars universe, obviously droids are not in that group of people that the galaxy cares about.
Yeah. Regarding the cantina, I actually wonder if, their equivalent of an anti-discrimination law would actually apply or be enforced there, because although, it's pretty clear they're involved in interplanetary commerce, what with Mos Eisley being a space station, it seems like Tatooine is a pretty lawless place. Even under the Empire, though maybe less so than the Republic. Yeah, I mean, they've got slavery there.
I guess they have ADA laws.
And which is, interesting to going back to like our earlier discussion of slavery in the US, like the Star Wars galaxy is a world in which, slavery still de facto occurs. How is it, a human or other sentient alien species slave and a droid who is generally treated as property, how are those different in this world?
Yeah.
By basis of birth, it's a really, Clone Wars dealt with slavery a few times. And it was a triggering point for Anakin because he, having been a slave as a child,
Right.
was not happy about that. And so again, lot to unpack there with, yeah, it's a wonderful way to treat ethics of this is bad,
Yeah.
good to others. And if droids are just imprinted based upon conduct, be nice to them because that's what they learn.
Yeah. I think I'm actually revising my opinion slightly that maybe they haven't fully achieved the characteristics of life and personhood, but they seem like they're moving in that direction, and like people are actively trying to prevent it with things like, I'm thinking of, there's several mentions of like, oh, if you don't wipe your droid's memory periodically, they develop personality quirks. And people talk about that as though it's a bad thing, even though most of the droids we see as major characters, it's a good thing. So I think it's, that's within the Star Wars universe. That's sort of interesting ethical question that most of the characters we love seem to disagree with what the actual mainstream opinion is.
Mm-hmm. Because again, Luke is always good to R2.
Yeah.
Always cares about him, loves him.
Yeah.
Anakin was too, so it's definitely a trait.
Yeah.
And Leia never underestimate a droid because, she's got that Skywalker blood in her, and she knows the score. So, and Rey's also of that caliber. Yeah. So there's a lot of the lovable characters are very good towards droids. Han, it might be the exception of.
Yeah.
Easily annoyed, but yeah, still the good guy. So yes. So now that we've solved the world's problems, this was a rip-roaring good time to geek out with analysis of droids in Star Wars and what kind of rights they have. And does anyone else agree with they would need a new category? New set of legal protections in order to.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Current law doesn't cover it, but it's the intent's there. I think.
And even here, I mean, there have been a number of articles and organizations that are looking at, AI and the ethics behind AI and whether or not we have a moral obligation to our machines and putting moral codes into AIs, especially those used in, with the military. But current law just doesn't cover it.
No. Another topic for another day. But with that, everyone, thanks for tuning in, and we will be back next Saturday for another Star Wars topic. Stay tuned, and want to thank our panelists, and we'll stop the broadcast.
Thanks, everyone.
now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Where?
That was so interesting.